Hello and welcome back to another episode. Now today I really want to talk about, I suppose, a time in my life when I got really excited for something that I just couldn't have, and that was a Sega Dreamcast. Now I've already mentioned in a previous video how I used to get the old magazine. I didn't subscribe to it, but I used to get the old copy of the Sega Saturn magazine. And in this particular issue, this one is from July 1998, issue 33. There is a special all about the story of the year, the Dreamcast, with over 30 screenshots, Sega president interviewed, Euro launch games and new details. The new machine exposed. Yes, exposed. Now, yeah, I hate that word, I really do. But this magazine has always actually kept me entertained, even years after the Dreamcast was launched, because I love the excitement that was engendered in this particular article. They talk about how this is going to be a console which will have superior technology well after the year 2000. Dreamcast will be the greatest games machine technology until beyond the year 2000. They also use phrases like, and this is one that still makes me kind of giggle, ironically, phrases such as, "The biggest benefit of the Dreamcast is in supplying almost movie-like graphics." Yes. Now that may sound as though that they're actually lying to you, and actually, to be fair, at the beginning of this article they say something like, you might think, sure, drooling sycophantic praise from the official Sega magazine, but you really are going to have to trust us on this one. Sega have got everything right for the launch of the Dreamcast. And actually, to be fair, the screenshots made a big impression on me. I remember well, actually drooling, oddly enough, over the screenshots in this article. You had the president of Sega in various different scenarios. His head basically was floating, rendered in 3D. Apparently this looked, near realistic. His head did, for the time, you've got to remember. And it was compared to the opening to Mario. When you could play with Mario's head and tweak his ear and his nose and this kind of thing in Mario 64. Well, it was like that, but with this particular person's head floating around instead, and it had really cool things. It had really good lighting effects. The Dreamcast logo, for example, superimposed in light on his face at one point. Lots of particle effects, lots of movement and motion, blur and effects going on. It was an impressive demo, and the launch of the console was looking quite good actually, and everything from the openness really of Sega in terms of how it was approaching this. For example, nice big interviews talking about why should, for example, Sega Saturn owners come over to the Dreamcast. Is Sega actually worried about the fact that that they're competing with a huge install base and the loyalty of the PlayStation? Well, the PlayStation fans, actually, by this point they were getting fans, but certainly the people who invested in that other company, in that other console, and so I felt really confident actually around about this time with the Dreamcast. I was thinking, yeah, that this could be the one. Sadly, I hadn't actually been able to own a Sega Saturn, even though I'd been getting the magazine for a while. But I thought maybe actually I can get hold of the Dreamcast, and I didn't. I kept the magazine. Like I said, I've kept this magazine for nigh on 20 years now. And every now and then I'd get it out just to again drool over some of the content. And to be fair, actually this particular issue has some other great content. It's got a review of Riven, the follow-up to Myst. It's got the Phantasy Star collection, which is quite cool. And there's a phrase in there that I absolutely love, where they're talking about how what was it? Remember when Sega was cool? When you could buy a Sega game without being sneered at by PlayStation owners or gobbed on by N64 freaks? Then you'll surely remember Phantasy Star. And I have to say, I was one of those N64 freaks. I had an N64, I loved it. But Well, certainly I've become an N64 freak. But nonetheless, yeah, every now and then I'd get this magazine out and I would drool over that initial article talking about the Dreamcast. And it was only actually last year that I finally got hold of a Dreamcast, and also some lovely games. I was looking to get a copy of Shenmue, things like Blue Stinger. I've got something like approaching, say, 40 odd games for the Dreamcast, and that was actually partly bought and partly given to me by a friend. And the console didn't let me down. It was ahead of its time in many ways. The one thing I suppose I find strange about playing the Dreamcast, though, and this is after a lifetime of being trained to play in certain ways, once you got to the N64 and then the GameCube and then beyond, the idea of having a second thumb control for the camera angle has become very natural. So using the second analog stick, or on the N64 often the yellow C buttons were the camera control, that's been very natural for me for a long time. So actually going to a 3D games console like the Dreamcast and playing, for example, Blue Stinger, and not being able to control where the camera is, other than maybe going to first person view, but having to wait for the computer to swing the camera around as you turn your character, that's been a bit of a learning curve. But it hasn't let me down. I've been playing the Dreamcast solidly now for the better part of a year, and I just can't get enough of it. Every single game I put in there is more or less a gem, and that's probably because the ones that are still floating around and aren't super rare are good, you know. I'm pretty sure the dross has been filtered out or has become rare because no one bought it, but I loved it, and really my love of the Dreamcast comes from that glorious summer dreaming of the Dreamcast. I was looking at this thing and just wondering what's it going to be like, and thinking about the online gameplay, and I was really curious about what would Sonic do in this new console, this new world that was opening up for him. And Sonic did actually appear in that the demo that was in the article, and there's this little sort of sneak preview of Sonic. It says, so they got a bit excited and they said, Sonic's first appearance on Dreamcast came in the Iri-san demo, and he's running across the front of the guy's face, but that was the first little glimpse of Sonic. I was wondering what will Sonic be like in this console, and arguably Sonic's best game ever. Again, it's a game that I have, and I love it. I can't stop playing that one either. So, okay, sorry, let me just stop there. Not best game ever, best 3D game ever. Let me just correct myself. His best game ever, as far as I'm concerned, is probably Sonic 2 on the Mega Drive. But his best three-dimensional game, his best foray into the 3D world that there's been yet, and that was again on the Dreamcast. So I just remember being so. This was the console that almost got away. The Dreamcast nearly never came into my life, despite it being this source of wonderment for me for quite a long time. As I say, not least things like online gaming. That said, though, I also remember some of the colossal failures of the game. I remember there being tremendously damaging rumours, certainly floating around school, about the instability of online play. And obviously we're talking about a time when internet was still dial-up. You know, broadband might have just about been starting to be thought of, but really people for the most part had to either use your phone or use the internet, or use it for gaming. And often families would have arguments, and often the children would lose out. So online gaming was a bit of a pipe dream, no pun intended, in terms of the capacity of that internet pipe, as it were. But it was still exciting. I remember the excitement. I remember all the talk about the 3D capacity of the Dreamcast, and also the fact that at the time, yeah, sure, okay, the Sega Saturn hadn't had the longest lifespan of a console. I think it was about 3 years ish, but there was no idea that this was going to be the last console that Sega put out. I mean, at the time they were talking about, let me just check here. yeah, Sega, the Dreamcast essentially being all about the future looking bright now for Sega because of the launch of the Dreamcast. This was going to be their relaunch essentially, and sadly it didn't last very long at all, and not that long into the new millennium, the console was axed. It's just such a shame in some ways. Incidentally, did you know, so according to this, the Dreamcast logo is a symbol of infinity and the very universe itself. That's deep. But anyway, I just thought I'd talk a little bit about this because it was not a big impact on me as a child because I didn't get to play it, but in terms of the imagination that this console, the imaginings that this console sparked in my brain, it was a very rich time for me. I thumbed these 4 or 5 pages so many times in that summer and in the years since. I can barely look at them without smiling, without grinning. But actually also as well, obviously there was the VMS, as it was called in this, or the VMU, the Visual Memory Unit, or Visual Memory System, which was being touted or touted as a interconnectable with almost anything. It says here that it's going to be like a mini games console in its own right, but the VMS is designed to interface with anything. It links up the Dreamcast controller, but Sega also demonstrated the machine at work with arcade games, computers, and even mobile phones. Again, way ahead of its time, and it just didn't quite have the look of the gods with it, which is a bit of a shame. But that said, though, I'm happy that I finally got a copy of these games, and also a console to play myself last year. Also, incidentally, it's worthwhile saying I am really intrigued by, if I can just find the article, this game called Deep Fear. I'll just sort of get the light off it a bit. Deep Fear. Now, if you have played Deep Fear, I'd like to know what it's like, because everything I've read about it says it's kind of like Resident Evil. It's no better and no worse than Resident Evil. It seems to use a very similar graphics engine, but I never got a chance to play this because this was a Saturn game. If you've played it, please let me know what it's like, because I might get a Saturn just to play it. But we'll see. Anyway, I don't want to keep on going on too much about this. I think I've said my bit. So if you have any thoughts, or indeed any fond memories of this time, sort of the build up to the launch of the Dreamcast and what it was like to actually get the console maybe at the time, please comment below. I'd love to hear from you. For me, it was a dream which lasted, as I say, the best part of 20 years, and was finally fulfilled last year when I was 29. But now I'm a happy 30-year-old with a Dreamcast, living the dream. Anyway, as ever guys, until next time, do take care. Bye bye.